Welcome, everybody. This is Sunil Iyengar, Director of the Office of Research and Analysis of the National Endowment for the Arts. I'm very pleased to welcome you to our quarterly public webinar sponsored by the NEA Interagency Task Force on the Arts and Human Development. Just a few words of housekeeping before we begin. You're all muted and will be able only to hear us. This webinar will consist of 2 PowerPoint presentations. Following our presentations will be a Q&A session. You can submit questions or comments at any time using the Q&A box below the PowerPoint you see on your screen. We will do our best to address as many as possible during the time we have. Please do not use the raise hand button. Also, please note that this webinar will be posted in the webinars section of our website in a few days, so you can refer to it in the future. Okay. Just a moment. Slide. It's not. Excuse me while I try to change the slide here for a moment. Okay, well, while we're getting that underway, let me just tell you that this webinar, it's actually one below before this. Okay, there we go. Thank you. So the featured speakers for this webinar are Su-Xiang Lim, who is the Program Director and Chair of the Coordinating Committee Science of Learning Centers Program at the National Science Foundation. And Su-Xiang is a member of our Interagency Task Force on the Arts and Human Development. And working with her over the last couple of years or so, we actually settled on the choice of this topic for this particular webinar because we both, the NEA and NSF, it turns out, have grantees doing great research in the area of the visual arts, specifically drawing, and a couple of interesting aspects related to human development. In the case of Laura Likova, who's a principal investigator for Smith Kettlewell Eye Research Institute, who's an NSF grantee. Laura's doing some fascinating work related to drawing and learning, which you'll see in a moment. And in the case of the NEA's research grantee, grant recipient, Brooklyn College, represented by PI Jennifer Drake, assistant professor of the Department of Psychology there, is doing some work on drawing and emotional coping. So we're going to be looking at 2 facets of drawing as they relate to human development, specifically learning and coping, as we've said. So I'm going to turn it over in a moment to Su-Xiang, but let me just first give you my routine quarterly update on work that's been underway with the task force, which now consists of about 19 different federal entities working together periodically to look at issues related to the arts and either health or education along the lifespan. First of all, just last month, at the end of February, we had an interesting summit held at the National Institutes of Health campus in Bethesda. And the summit was the National Summit on the Arts and Health in the Military, heavily attended, and I'm pleased to say you can now see archived videos from the event if you go to the Americans for the Arts website and artsusa.org. You can find in there itself a lot of videos, including, and some of them I understand are going to be posted later this week, including our own chairman, the NEA chairman, Jane Chu, speech by her, and also it turns out a major co-sponsor of this particular event was a task force member agency, the National Institute of Complementary and Integrative Health, and their director, Dr. Josephine Briggs, also spoke at the event. So I urge you to take a look at that. Secondly, speaking of NIH, some of you who've attended these webinars in the past know that we worked with them recently to develop, NIH developed a funding opportunity announcement for research having to do with arts-based approaches to palliative care, specifically symptom management related to arts-based approaches to symptom management and palliative care. And that funding opportunity is still open. So if you're a researcher, or if you have researcher friends or colleagues you'd like to alert to this opportunity, please let them know that Lynn Adams at the National Institute of Nursing Research at the NIH is willing to take their questions, and here's her address. So, to go forward, let me just say that I think I said there were 2 webinars, or actually 3, and the first one is going to be given by Su-Xiang Lim from the National Science Foundation. Su-Xiang?
So first, let me thank the NEA for this opportunity to share our excitement about this NSF-funded project on learning and drawing. I'll start with a very brief introduction of the Science of Learning Centers program, which funded this project. Learning is fundamental to human performance and accomplishment. Oops, excuse me, wrong slide. Not surprisingly, learning is an important research topic for the disciplines supported by the NSF. Knowledge about learning will not only inform how we learn and teach, but also how we design innovative technologies for space exploration, national security, and for improving health and well-being. Even though much has been invested in research about learning, the knowledge is fragmented across the different disciplines. This does not help us to address the many complex problems about learning that still elude our understanding. To address this challenge, the NSF established a Science of Learning Centers program in 2003 to stimulate interdisciplinary collaborations on studies of learning in humans, other animals, and in machines. This new science of learning draws on expertise from diverse disciplines, as shown on this slide, including biological sciences and neuroscience, social and economic sciences, cognitive and behavioral sciences, education, engineering, computer and information sciences, and the mathematical and physical sciences. The goals of the SLC program are to make transformative advances through integrated interdisciplinary research on learning, and then to use the knowledge to address educational, technological, and workforce challenges. I'm including the next 2 slides so you can find additional information about the NSF Science of Learning activities if you are interested. The first slide shows our recent call for proposals to form collaborative research networks in science of learning. And the second slide shows the 6 Science of Learning Centers in the SLC portfolio. You can learn more about these interdisciplinary centers if you go to the SLC webpage shown here. And it also has links to the websites of individual centers as well as other information, including a workshop report on art, creativity, and learning. The work you will hear about today is one funded as an exploratory project to provide proof of concept for innovative and yet untested ideas. A project which I'm happy to say has since grown into a successful line of research for the principal investigator, Dr. Laura Likova. The project is one example of how careful studies of learning as it occurs through experiences and training in various art forms, in this case drawing, can provide new insights about brain function. It also brings to the fore a greater appreciation of the many and varied brain, cognitive, and behavioral processes that must be harnessed to produce a simple but highly communicative line drawing such as this one. The project also illustrates how interdisciplinary expertise in the person of Dr. Likova has been important for the conception and execution of this project. Dr. Likova grew up in Bulgaria, where she received formal training in mathematics and a degree in computer science. Fascinated by the complexity and power of the human brain, she initiated a nationwide project on novel computer architectures and neural network modeling of the human visual system. From this background in artificial intelligence, she went on to obtain a PhD in cognitive neuroscience, followed by her journey to the United States for postdoctoral training in human vision and brain imaging at the Smith Cadwell Eye Research Institute in San Francisco. She remains today at the Smith Catterwell Eye Institute as the head of her own neuroscience lab. A strong and steady thread at the core of her personal life and professional career is Dr. Likova's love of the arts, particularly in drawing and in poetry, where she has won several awards. It is with particular pleasure that I now turn to Dr. Likova to tell us about this project that weaves together so well her passions in the arts and science, a project which has raised important and exciting new questions about brain plasticity and working memory, and the potential for using drawing as therapy for neurorehabilitation. Dr. Likova on harnessing the power of drawing to drive brain plasticity.
So very much for that introduction, Hugh Young. Now, I'll be talking about drawing, which has this amazing power to bring things to life, like these famous hands from Escher, that they're like drawing themselves out of nothing. As Hugh Young mentioned already, understanding the brain mechanisms underlying art, and particular drawing, and moreover finding ways to harness their power for neurorehabilitation is not only a major personal power, but it became main line of research in my lab. So one of the first questions I'm often asked is, why study drawing? Isn't it too simple? Is it really effective? So my answer is no. Drawing is not simple at all. So if you think about drawing, you realize that drawing orchestrates multiple cognitive mechanisms. Here I'm listing some of them, like spatial analysis, spatial constructional thinking, geometric understanding. Drawing demands and engages memory, both working and long-term memory, attention. It requires precise motor control. So you have to be able to really control the drawing hand along a precise trajectory. Emotions, Jen will tell you more about this later. Empathy and different forms of embodied cognition. Well, let me move to the next slide. So this was to outline things on the behavioral side. But I was interested what happened in the brain as well. For example, is the brain different for different forms of drawing? Let's say scribble. So scribble looks like drawing, but it does not involve any of the cognitive or memory components that I just listed in the previous slide. So how is it different for scribble versus real drawing that produces recognizable images? So what you see here are some fMRI data from the brains of people doing scribbling or drawing from memory. So if we look first at the top, these are the left and the right hemisphere of the brain. fMRI is allowing us to see the pattern of brain activation. And it is shown by this orange-reddish coloration on the brain. So what you see in scribble is that the activation is restricted mainly to the left hemisphere. And the areas that it is are basic motor and sensory motor areas. So the left hemisphere contralateral to the right drawing hand. And in contrast, if you compare this restricted left hemisphere only activation in scribble with the bottom row, the bottom plot, drawing from memory, so you can see this dramatic difference between what the brain is doing while simply scribbling without all the cognitive components inherent to drawing. And there is this huge difference in brain activity while the brain is drawing from memory. So you see this expanded orange, expanded brain networks and they are going to involving a very high order cognitive regions. So we see that drawing, I was showing you so far mainly drawing from memory. Drawing from memory involves many abilities. It activates multiple brain networks. So while people are drawing, many parts of the brain are working, and they're working. This is really highly like symphonies, highly orchestrated work. So they're working in a highly coordinated manner. So my idea was to invert the process, to use this fact, to use this single but multi-component, highly comprehensive memory task, engaging so many brain systems, to use this task to develop training for enhancing these very same abilities. And moreover, to find a way to do this with and without vision. So like spatial cognition and memory that are so important in drawing, so they're very important to all of us. But I have to say that they're even much more important for people that don't have vision. So this was an important intention in my work. The development of such method required some new conceptualizations and some new hypotheses. And one main idea here was that developing of such method would actually allow us like to catch two birds in one go, because we could use such a training method both for brain imaging as brain imaging paradigm to probing neural plasticity, and also we can use it as an effective neurorehabilitation. So further conceptualizations to make this method possible are listed here. So I wanted the idea to not only simply to develop this method, but to use this method to study the brain reorganization, brain plasticity as a result of learning to draw. So how do you study the brain, the changes in the brain in somebody who is learning to draw? So you would like to see the whole process from the beginning, the whole development. However, I mean, all potential sighted subjects, all sighted people, already have some experience with drawing. So my strategy was to focus on the blind and to use blind, and it turned out that this was the best model for this answering the questions I had. So I realized that drawing is not simply visual, but it is spatial. So we can develop methods for drawing in the blind, because space transcends any sensory modality. All this separation of visual, tactile, and so on. You can explore now around yourself with closed eyes any object, and you'll be able to perceive the spatial shape. So space is beyond this sensory separation. So in drawing, however, we need another step. It's not enough to perceive. The information has to be somehow translated to the motor system, because this information has to guide the drawing hand, and it has to drive with a really high precision. So in the sighted, we have this eye-hand coordination mechanism that we use for, obviously, eye-hand coordination. However, with the loss of vision in blindness, this mechanism is also lost. So my next idea was to replace, through the training, to replace the eye-hand coordination by a different mechanism. And what I had in mind was memory hand coordination. So instead of using the visual images to guide their hand, they are using internal memory representations to guide the hand. But this is, again, requires a question of learning. So the cognitive-kinesthetic training, this is how I called my method, speeds up tremendously the whole learning process. What you see here are a few examples of drawings from totally blind people after the training. The training takes 1 week of 2 hours a day. So it is really a tremendous speed up, and this is important both from a rehabilitation viewpoint, but it is also very important from a viewpoint of running research, because it really helps things to be on a much better time scale. So you see a vase with a flower and 2 very different faces. And the message from this slide, what it's telling us is that such well-coordinated drawings, and these are freehand drawings from memory, wouldn't be possible at all unless 2 things happen during the training. So first, the blind people had to learn to create good enough, precise enough, and stable memory images in their brain. And second, they learn how to use these images to guide their drawing hands. So in other words, one of the main benefits of drawing is that under the demands of this task, this task activates what I call not perception action, but perception cognition action loop. To perform the task, you really have to engage the whole loop, from perception to memory, cognition to action. So under these demands of the task, the brain is pressed to find a way to reorganize if necessary, but to enhance memory capabilities. Here I would like only to mention that although I talk about the blind mainly, the capability of this cognitive kinesthetic training are beyond the blind population, and they can be used, for example, for studying the effect of visual development on learning through different populations. So I used fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, to look at the brain, and some special MRI-compatible drawing equipment that we developed in my lab. So before any training, we scan the brains of people. What you see here, this is a participant on the bed of a scanner trying to draw before being trained. So this is followed by a week of cognitive kinesthetic training. And then after the training is completed, we ask people again to get in the fMRI. We measure their brain, and also in order to look for long-term effects of this drawing and to see if the brain continues to change after the training is completed, we scan them again 2 months later. So there is no intervening training between these 2 scans. So here is to look what happens in the brain. This slide is showing the situation before any training. On the right, you see this drawing. These are people are trying to draw. They explore tactile images. They have to remember them. And after 20 seconds, they have to try to draw them from memory. So you can see here, these are very primitive attempts to memorize and to draw these images before training. In the right top corner, this is medial surface of the brain. The black square is showing the location of the primary visual cortex on the brain. And so this blown up image of that part of the brain is shown just below it. You see this green outline? This green outline is indicating the position of the primary visual cortex. It's called area V1. So it's called V1 because this is the very first area of the cortex where the information from the eyes enter. Again, orange, red indicates activation, and you see that in this area there is almost no significant activation before we start the training. And so here is after training. So after training, you see this dramatic change in V1. So we have this blooming orange activation, very well structured in V1 after training. And importantly, this enhancement of brain activation is also correlated with enhancement in their drawing performance. So it's not their causal relation. It's not a random thing. So I'd like only for a comparison to show you back the brain before, and this is after training. Let me go to the next slide. So this was a big change in the brain. So this finding of massive, well-structured activation in the primary visual cortex of people that have no vision has huge implications for people who work in the field. One reason is that for a long time we believed that this part of the brain is for visual information only. These results are showing you that this is not the case because these subjects, they were born without vision, they were learning without vision, they were drawing the learned without vision, and they were drawing it from non-visual memory. They didn't even touch the images during, this is freehand drawing from memory, so they not only didn't see, but they didn't even touch any image during the drawing. So what does this mean? This result suggested that V1, this primary visual area, is the neural basis for an important theoretical concept, the visual spatial sketchpad for working memory. So intuitively even, it makes a lot of sense because the whole visual cortex is topographically organized, but V1 is the largest and the best, the highest spatial resolution map in the brain with parallel processing. In other words, this is the best hardware, so to speak, for our drawing task that requires just this kind of high spatial precision. And this is an evidence that the brain, under the demands of a task, the brain finds a way to implement the best solution for the specific task. So one more point here I'd like to make. So again, my subjects were not sighted, so we cannot talk about visual spatial sketchpad for memory. So this led to a reconceptualization that this sketchpad actually has to be spatial sketchpad, spatial, independent of specific sensory modality. It doesn't care if the information comes through the visual or, in our case, through the tactile modality. Sorry, I skipped a slide. Well, this was an exciting finding that drawing can help us to answer very fundamental scientific questions. It, however, opened further even more challenging questions. So we went on to ask, what is activating this visual area without any vision? And where is this visual area sending this non-visual? It's even not any kind of sensory, but it's rather memory signal to which other parts of the brain. So these are really important questions in science because they concern our very understanding of principles of brain architecture. So these blind people, again, they're drawing from memory, they're drawing objects and faces. So the first place to go, we decided to look at key memory and object processing networks, and I'll give you some brief data. First from memory. So hippocampus, as most of you know, the hippocampus and the surrounding structures are the key, very well-known memory structures. So here you see a really busy slide, but I hope it could make a clear point. So what you see is comparison before and after in the hippocampus and in the primary visual cortex. So remember, we want to understand who is working with the V1 non-visually. So we want to compare the hippocampus with V1 to see if at one moment they may be doing something together. So the hippocampus before, I have to explain, so the three color bars indicate the strength of the response. The blue bar is for tactile exploration and encoding in memory. The red bar is for our drawing from memory. And the green bar is for scribbling. So you can see that before training, this hippocampal area is activated in the blue bar in the tactile exploration and encoding in memory. After the training in drawing from memory, we see very different pictures. So the hippocampus is not very much interested in the blue bar in the exploration and coding, but its main interest is in the drawing from memory task, this strong red bar in the middle of the after plot in the hippocampus. So if we compare this to the right plot in V1, I'll mention only briefly that before training, I mean, the V1 is not doing much. There's some really unusual, transient, abnormal, non-specific waveforms, and after the training only, V1 becomes this visual spatial sketchpad. So the pattern in V1 and the hippocampus, if you compare after hippocampus V1, this pattern of response now became very similar. So what this tells us is that somehow a drawing is able to make changes, to drive changes, even in such key area as the hippocampus, and that this happens in concert with the memory sketchpad in V1. In other words, the main message is that this drawing from memory is not too simple. It really is working deep in the brain. Sorry, I already went to the next slide, but this is actually a slide, sorry, to make my last point, which is, again, the drawing produces changes not only in the primary visual cortex, in the hippocampus, but in many other parts of the brain, such as the object processing pathway. So this is another very studied pathway in the brain at the bottom on the lateral surface. There'll be no time to go over these really exciting findings in the object processing pathway, I just want to indicate here that the drawing-based, this is our approach. My training method was entirely drawing-based, as I made it clear, I hope. This drawing-based learning paradigm led us again to very interesting scientific results. These results are giving us much better understanding of the reorganization of functional architecture in the brain, and we are currently working on these findings. And in conclusion, I have to emphasize that, okay, there are a lot of interesting findings already, but there is much more to be done. So in summary, I'll try to briefly list the main statements, the main findings. The first thing, again, is that drawing is not simple. Drawing orchestrates multiple cognitive, memory, and spatiomotor brain mechanisms. The simple but multi-component and highly comprehensive task of drawing from memory can be used to train at once a full spectrum of spatial and cognitive skills, and with and without vision. The cognitive-kinesthetic drawing training speeds up tremendously the learning and helps us to harness the power of drawing for rehabilitation of memory and spatial cognition. After only a week of this training, even people with no vision from birth became able to draw complex objects and even faces from memory. Faces and recognizable and looking like the model they are trying to represent, you have to admit, it's a difficult thing even for the sighted. So this was quite an achievement for them. The memory drawing in the blind helped us to review the role of the primary visual cortex as a spatial sketchpad for memory, independent from the sensory modality. As you saw, drawing can affect even key memory structures, such as the hippocampus. The current results have significant implications for emerging theories of functional brain architecture and brain plasticity. So this is the brain ability to change even in adulthood. I didn't mention it, but all my subjects were adults up to age of 75. And as I indicated in one of the slides, so these people, by the end of the training, so they were saying things like, this is going to change my life, or I'm still able to learn. There are still things for me in life. So this was really highly rewarding. So these are my detailed conclusions. But if I have to compress the main message of this work, I'd like to say that I believe it's time to transcend the art-science dichotomy to which we are so used to. The arts are already showing, it's not only visual art, there are a lot of findings in music and in other arts. The arts are already showing that they have the power to transform brains and lives, and even to help neuroscience to address fundamental questions. And my personal belief is that learning paradigms are the most effective tool to understand brain plasticity. One reason that this kind of paradigm allows us to see the whole evolution of changes within the very same brains. So,
there you go.
Thank you very much.
yeah.
Appreciate it.
So,
this is
okay,
Sunil Iyengar again from the
finally,
NEA. Hello?
Finally, I wanted to
Laura?
say, hello?
Yes, Laura, we have to move on. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Now for something completely different, we're going to hear from Jennifer Drake, who's with Brooklyn College at the City University of New York, on children's use of drawing to regulate emotions. And Jennifer actually is a PI on an NEA research project looking at the short-term and long-term psychological and psychophysiological benefits of drawing for non-artists. However, she's going to be talking about some of her other work today related to use of drawing among children to regulate their emotions. Thank you. Jennifer?
Thank you, Sunil, and thank you to the National Endowment of the Arts for having me. And as Sunil mentioned, I'm be focusing today on just a snapshot of my work working with children. And so emotion regulation is an important component of children's development. And an important aspect is learning which strategies to use when they're encountered with emotionally arousing and stressful situations. As adults, we possess the knowledge of what strategies to use, but children are less likely to have such knowledge. And one of the most common strategies that children employ to regulate their emotions is distraction. And given how absorbed young children are when they draw, this might be a pleasurable activity that they may seek out to counteract a negative mood. So just a roadmap of my talk today, I'm going to address 3 questions. Does drawing improve mood in children, first off? Second, does drawing improve mood when the image is freely constructed? So do children have to create the image on their own to improve their mood, or can they copy an image and have the same benefits? And then finally, does drawing lead to higher levels of absorption in children? And that may be contributing to why there is this greater mood improvement. So first, does drawing improve mood in children? And we so we included 2 age groups, younger and older children, so younger children between the ages of 6 and 8, and older children between the ages of 10 and 12. And we concluded 2 age groups in order to kind of test between 2 competing hypotheses. The first being that younger children, they may be more absorbed in drawing than older children. They're less critical of their drawings, and thus they may have better or greater mood benefits. And then second, it may be that older children have greater benefits, greater mood improvement after drawing, because they play, unlike younger children, they play a more active role in regulating their own emotions. Where a younger child, they may rely on the help from a parent or a caregiver. So in our studies, we present children first with these 5 faces, and we ask them to rate how they're feeling from very happy to very sad. So that gives us kind of a baseline mood measure. And then we have a sad mood induction. So the experimenter says to the child, think of a time when you wanted something really good to happen to you and it didn't, and you felt really upset and disappointed. I want you to close your eyes and think about how you're feeling when it didn't happen. So children are told that and are asked to do that, and then they close their eyes for about 30 seconds to a minute, and then they recall the event to the experimenter. We then ask children again to rate how they're feeling from very happy to very sad, to make sure that their mood did go down after thinking about that sad event. And then we randomly assign them to one of 2 conditions. So we have an express condition and a distract condition. So in the drawing to express condition, we ask children to focus on the event that they thought of. So I want you to draw a picture of the time you were, and we name the event. And in the drawing distract condition, we ask children to draw a house. So the house is intended to be a neutral item, unrelated to what the children were thinking about. And then finally, after drawing, we again ask how they're feeling from very happy to very sad, allowing us to determine what mood benefits were found. And so here's an example of a child's drawing from the drawing to express condition. And this is a child who thought of a time when they were unable to go on a play date with a friend. And you'll see the little girl, the shortest girl on the left-hand side, she has a sad face. And this is an example in the drawing to distract condition. So children were given about 5 minutes. They had markers and paper to make their drawings. Okay, so here we have the results for mood improvements, and I'll just kind of walk you through the graph. So along the x-axis, we have age groups. We have the younger and the older children. And then along the y-axis, where you see that blue bar with mood change. So we looked at how much did mood improve from when they thought about the sad event to after they had completed their drawing. And what we found, you see the red bars that are circled, that we found that those in the distract condition had a greater mood improvement than those in the express condition. That's the blue bar. And we found this was similar for younger and older children. So there was no difference in what age group. So it seems that distraction is really the key ingredient here. In our second study, we were interested in, okay, we've shown these effects with distraction. Can we show something similar when we ask children to copy an image? Or does the child have to create something, from their own imagination, from their own mind, in order to show these effects or to have the benefits? So again, working with children between ages 6 to 12. So we compared drawing the distraction task with copying. Again, to look at maybe it's just, the motor act of drawing, of creating something that's improving mood. And so the copy condition allowed us to kind of compare whether it's the motor act of drawing or actually creating something on your own. So again, the drawing to express and drawing distract condition were identical to the first study. So in the express condition, children were told to draw an example of the event they thought of. And in the distract condition, they were instructed to draw a house. And in the copy condition, we gave them line drawings of kind of everyday objects. So here's an example here. They also had markers. We kept color constant. They were still interacting with color. And we asked them to copy these kind of everyday shapes. Okay. So here again, we have it broken up by younger and older children, looking at mood improvement, mood change. So the red bars are distract condition. And first we find what we did in the first study, where the distract condition in red, they have higher mood improvement, greater mood improvement than the blue bar for the express. And we also find that those in the distract condition, the red, they also have greater mood improvement than those in the green bar, the copy condition. And we're showing that it's distraction not by copying, but creating an image that's leading to mood improvement. And we found that younger children had a greater mood benefit than the older children. So we did find an effect of age. And then in our final study, we looked at level of absorption. So maybe this mood improvement is due to the fact that kids are really immersed in drawing. And so we were interested in whether mood elevates because it leads to states of flow. And this is a term that Csikszentmihalyi has developed, describing flow as this kind of balance between challenge and skill and leading to experiences of flow. So this is looking at children's level of flow. So we have, and this is all the children, younger and older. So in the red bar, we have distract, the blue and express. And we're finding that children in the distract condition have greater levels of flow or absorption than children in the express condition. So in conclusion, we found that drawing does improve mood in children. And it seems to be most effective when children use it as a form of distraction. So when they turn their thoughts away from the sad event or the sad memory that they thought of, it seems to be most effective. And these effects seem specific to an image that's really constructed. So when we asked children to copy an image, we didn't find the same benefits as if children were creating something on their own. And then we finally find that drawing to distract leads to greater levels of absorption. So children are more absorbed in the activity. And there's many people, so this is many people to thank, and so they're listed here. And I'll turn it back over to Sunil.
Thank you very much. We maybe have about 5 minutes or so for some additional questions. If people want to go ahead and type in your questions, I'll be happy to take them. Thank you first of all to all of our presenters. Very interesting information coming to us and really fascinating research here. So one question I just wanted to kind of ask, I guess, for each of you is, in terms of the research, where you see the research support for some of this work coming from. I mean, we heard, of course, how Laura's work flows from NSF's priorities in terms of understanding the science of learning, for example, and the program Su Xiang administers. And in research for the NEA, for example, we have a small research grants program that helped to support some of the other work, although you didn't show that particular, you're still working on that project, I know, Jennifer.
Right.
Are there other funders or do you feel like this is a landscape right now where there are more and more people interested in supporting this research, or do you think it's more that traditional organizations are having to come up with inventive ways to look at the value of this work and funding it? I hope that question's somewhat clear. Jennifer, should we start with you?
Sure. I mean, I think that's my work has implications for like the National Institute of Mental Health. And I have, in a separate study, looked at kind of how over time, like this is a short-term study, so looking at, just a small dosage of drawing, but looking at like over a month period, can it help with kind of conduct disorder or just helping children to kind of just depression. So I think there are a lot of implications for, or interest, would hope, from the National Institute of Health, because there are mental health, I think drawing can help with certain mental health issues.
Thank you. Laura, do you have a thought on that?
Yes. So as you said, my work started with the Science for Learning Centers at NSF. However, the future continuation and expansion of this work wouldn't be possible without an R01 grant I just received from the National Eye Institute at NIH. So this is very, very exciting. I think that the understanding of the role of arts, both for fundamental research and neurorehabilitation. In my case, this is the main emphasis of this grant is on using drawing for neurorehabilitation in blindness in particular.
Thank you both. Laura, one of the things that struck me from watching your presentation is how central the arts are, in a sense, to even learning through science. I hope that makes sense. In other words, not only is the science of learning seem to be evident in how kinesthetically or spatially people are learning, but rather that the arts can be, and if you will, used to augment tools and strategies for learning about how the arts work, about how the brain works. And so that was quite fascinating to see that, it's not a way that we often are accustomed to thinking of the arts as sort of supporting, answering a specific research question that may not be arts related, if you know what I mean. Julene Johnson, somebody had a question, I believe. Do you think that the drawing training effects in drawing would be similar in sighted individuals? This is for you, Laura, again. Do you think that the drawing training effects would be similar in sighted individuals? And if so, why?
So as I mentioned, I talked about the blind mostly, because this is really the cleanest model to talk about drawing out of specifics of sensory modalities, effects, and so on. But we also run different groups, including sighted people, sighted but blindfolded temporarily, low vision, late onset blind, congenitally blind, and so on. So we are still working on this. Is really a large-scale comparative study. We're still working on this, but definitely we see that effect is again it's across the sensory modalities. I'd like to make one more point. So you said arts and learning. I think that using art as a learning paradigm has one a very important advantage. And this is that when, let's say, you are drawing, you have this emotional component. You have fulfillment of the outcome. So I think this is this is very important component for some effective and enjoyable learning.
Thank you very much. And that actually, in a way, that kind of resonates also with what I heard from Jennifer in terms of understanding how children uniquely may respond to drawing from an emotional sense, and therefore thinking ahead, even though this wasn't in your presentation, Jennifer, but thinking about how that emotional, in this case coping, but how the emotional effects may translate down the road into retention and memory retention and learning. Jennifer, can you describe briefly in terms of what you're finding in children? Do you have anything sort of similar to this looking at adults, and do you have any reason to believe that what you find in adults is quite different, or you just give us a sense of comparison?
Sure. We actually, I did start with I have the adult work first, just to kind of understand what was going on with adults first and seeing how it differed in children. For the short-term results, we found similar findings where distraction is more beneficial. for both children and adults than expression. What we are looking to see if there is a difference is over time. So some of the writing literature that James Pennebaker has done is showing that expressive writing over time is more beneficial than kind of the distraction, and that's what we're looking at right now. And with the support of the National Endowment of the Arts, is how does it, maybe in the short term distraction is pretty good, but how about over time? Does it help for children and adults to kind of form kind of process that over time, kind of make meaning of the event, and then maybe expression is more beneficial?
A follow-up question for you from someone, Jennifer. The question is, have you considered suggesting drawing, and I think they're referring to the researchers, have they considered suggesting drawing a happy experience to see if the mood was even more greatly improved?
So they have done that with adults. Not my work, but the work of Ellen Winter and some others has looked at that kind of drawing, something positive versus something neutral. And they have found that, drawing something positive does improve mood more. The issue you run into there is you don't know whether it's the drawing of something positive or is it the thinking of something positive that is improving mood. So a good comparison would be kind of thinking about something positive versus drawing about something positive. And then you can kind of tease apart, is it the thinking part or is it the actual drawing of the positive memory or something that's leading to greater benefits?
So I have, I believe right now I have one more question, and I'm going to ask, maybe we can take maybe one or maybe two answers to this, but I'm opening it up for Su-Xiang too in case she wants to respond. Is it your impression that there's a lot of kind of, if you will, cross-pollination here when you think about the work, Jennifer, that you're doing about, regarding emotional psychology, or even within cognitive psychology, but then on the other hand, that on the one hand, and on the other hand, more neurophysiological kind of work that Laura has delved into. I mean, I'm not speaking only about your own particular research tracks, but thinking about it largely in terms of the research around the arts. Do you feel that there's, or maybe even outside the arts, do you feel that there's an interesting, do the groups talk to each other? Is there, I don't know if you've really paid attention much, Jennifer, in the past to some of the work going on with neuroscience, or conversely, Laura, if you've kind of looked at what psychologists through, maybe assessments and other tests have noted, even not through the brain studies, about some of the work, the outcomes you're interested in observing. Does that happen a lot?
Su-Xiang? Okay, I'd like to say that, so I mentioned the Science for Learning Centers program, the initial funding, but I'd like to say one more thing about, there was a very interesting workshop on art, creativity, and learning in 2008. So it was initiated by Su-Xiang Lim, the director of the program. And so this was a really exciting event. It brought together, just in an effort to do what you're asking, it brought together a range of artists and scientists from many countries. And I have to say that this meeting of artists and scientists, although I myself am doing some art, it's only for my own harmonization, but meeting with these people, having the discussions, this was a great encouragement for me to follow this line of research. So I believe more of these events are needed, and I believe, Sunil, that this workshop may have a similar effect.
Thanks for reminding me about that. Yeah, thank you very much. So we actually do have, I'm told we do have to wrap it up now. So I will just say that I do recall that workshop, and we will actually see if, Su-Xiang, maybe we can find a way to link to some of that material. I know that that's out there too. So it'd be great to bring that to a broader audience if people don't already know, because I do agree it helped to feed a lot of this work, and I've heard Laura talk about it. So thank you, Laura, very much. Thank you, Su-Xiang. And of course, also thank you, Jennifer. We very much appreciate your time, and we hope, and we want to thank everyone who tuned in today. This webinar will be archived, again, at arts.gov, so we encourage you to check back if you missed part of it. And we hope you'll tune in next time.